Alright, chapter 27, Dimensioning and Tolerances. Dimension and Tolerances, Mastering Solidworks, chapter 27. Dimensioning and Tolerance is an art form as much as a science. People are very passionate when discuss the right way of the performance of the task. True for the techniques are now the black and white, but highly dependent of the industry, meaning the manufacturer, the purpose of the drawing. The drawings might be used for the quote, manufacturing, inspection, assembly, testing. So in drawing as well with the dimension and tolerance for each for the purpose of time being the sum of the difference within each for the instance circumstance over the important to follow the stream of the drawing of the dimension properly where I have never seen the company follow the ANSI standard 100%. There's not an argument that I won't reignite. This is not an argument I want to reignite here. In this chapter, I'll focus on how the available tool works. You need to decide whether yourself how to apply them to meet situation. In this chapter, you learn to work with the dimensions of the drawings, explore the dimension property manager interface to apply items to dimension and add active tolerances. Putting a dimension for the drawing. The debate on how to give the dimension of the model of the drawing is much like the taste of the greater than less fulfilling debate. Each side of the issue has a valid point, but the questions is likely to be resolved any time soon. At the center of this debate, whether there should be the debate of the dimensions that would create with the model directly with the drawing, whether you should reference with the drawings created on the drawing. In the following section, I examine each method for the benefits of the drawing drawbacks. Shows dimension with a where's stick using insert model items. Insert model items take the dimension symbol, the annotation of the other elements. For the create of the model, for the put them onto the drawing, because the dimension come directly with a sketch of the feature of the model with the driven. They are driving dimension. The dimensions that you can double click on and change them on the drawing. In the same way, you can change the sketch feature dimension with the same effect with the result of the change of the dimension, even with the drawing cut of the parts and assemblies in which they will be changed. The concern of the model item to the top of the wave of the refeature basis, bringing only the items appropriate with the current view of the bringing items all into the view. The insertions can be further breakdown of the type of the insert of the it can become the specific pattern with accounts, codes, wizard, item specials, item symbol, item tools. Reference geometry type of the insert model items. You can choose the item insert item model items that you can choose access the command with the annotation toolbar. Model items to property manager interface shown in figure 27.1. Model items with a wizard stick dimension on whether stick place message place the type of the model we want to give the insert of the dimension annotation with reference to geometry group boxes. Then graphically select the feature of the drawing view you wish to insert the models into. A source of destination selection, entire model select feature, dimensions, eliminate duplicates, annotations with your symbols, reference geometry, options, and layers. Are the dimensions needed to be rearranged to some extent? Although Solidworks does try to arrange them so that they do not overlap. Figure 27 to show the result of bringing the dimensions into the view part of the download. Chapter 27. Chapter 27 and 2's default dimension for the dimension into the views. 27 and 2 contain with the duplicate dimensions overlapping the dimensions unnecessary long leader radius dimensions pointing to a wrong side of the arc dimension of the feature of the C with lots of awkward placement. This is what you want. This is what you can expect with the automatic function. For the best dimension for the be rearranged with the new views, and the creative with the worst probably require with the delete and replace the dimensions as needed. You can import dimensions to specify the feature with specific views in which you would be winding up going through the process several times to get the dimension need the views when they are needed in view. And if your company standards require that you must use the driving dimension of the drawing, this is probably the most successful route you can follow. To move the dimension with another view, with a shift the drag from one view to another, making the shift of the dimensions appropriate with the dimension view. Copy the dimension, you can control drag. If you cannot play with the dimension and view to which you can drag it, but the cursor will indicate the special cursor symbols. If you approach the task in placing the dimension in future and per view basis, it won't change the number of the dimensions you just move. If you just mean that it just means that you insert a fewer dimensions several times. Keeping in mind that you chose this method, you must perform a significant amount of the cleanup and tracking with the convenience of the head of the dimension put into the views that actually change the model with the drawing and are quite useful. So you have very much time, the effort doing this in this way. If you're designing your parts for the same dimension that use the drawing insert of the model items differently would go to the dimensions driven with parametric modeling these you may better served with the reference dimensions. Standard American National Standard Institute 1441 calls for manufacturing dimensions, product management interface, or project manager information to be attached directly to the 3D model. While standards may not be evenly implemented across all entries, some manufacturers also are making us use it now. 3D views can be placed on Solidworks drawings. Product management information can be attached to these views. These complete functionalities for the file of the Solidworks material MBD, which is a separate added-in package and therefore beyond the scope of this book. Using reference to dimensions, show the annotation system with a green arrow. One alternatively automatically inserts all the dimension of the manually placed reference to the smart dimensions. Create the reference dimension with the regular smart dimension tool. After the first, this appear with a to simply recreate the work that you have already done. This is somewhat true, but there's more to destroy. These dimensions are not duplicates of the model item. In fact, the reference dimension that you manually place on the drawing is completely different with the dimension used in the model. The dimensions are separately complete with a different purpose in the setting. While modeling, I tend to mention that in a way that the best modeling that is knows will be shown the manufacturer inspection drawing. Frequently workarounds avoid some of the special problems that forces different model dimension scheme that I prefer to use. The other feature is located with the midpoint of the edge, which involve the dimension whatsoever. The sketch may have the equal relations with which also the sketch elements that I mentioned, but still the defined dimensions may lead to face of the edges that are not finally molded or finally modeled or faces later changed by scale draft or fills beyond the draft involved with in this case of the plastic cast parts. Dimension of the sketch that may create the feature of the have little to do with the geometry of the dimension of the print of the inspection of the molding building. Dimension schemes of the models reflect need of the model to react to the change of the dimension of the schemes of the drawing. Fulfill the manufacturing's inspection method in order to minimize the tolerance stack up of the effect of the usage of the actual part. Although the strictly textual region of the dimension drawn within independently with the way of the model was dimension that the other factors that was such with the time and the neatness of the other replacement of the dimension. Time is an issue because of the time is finishing, rearrange the dimension, insert them automatically for the model of the changing, eliminating duplicate of the manually adding dimensions that were left out of that had been eliminated because of the inappropriate for some reason, as well as ensuring that all the necessary dimensions of the drawing, if you would have them more quicker to manually dimension the drawing correctly the first time they're using the reference drawings. Reference dimensions. In most cases, inserting model dimension of the drawing is impractical for the manufacturing inspection drawings unless they have simple plays with the machine hole and have taken the extreme care to make sure the models are dimensioned that way that you would represent it onto the drawing. This because of the amount of time necessary to take the geometrical tolerance into account. Some simple fact of the dimension sketch relation with the need for the effective modeling are useful, very different with the dimension need with the manufacturing or inspection. I recommend you the manual reference dimension place option, which works with much the same with the dimensions are added to the sketch dimensions that use in place of which they is called the driven or reference dimension. In drafting lingo, reference the dimension is usually shown with the parentheses around them when they are duplicated in some way. In some works, reference dimensions are similarly driven rather than driving. Dimension to find setting of the control of the parent entity of the reference dimension. The two tools option document prior to dimension add parentheses by default. Rapid dimension offers a manipulator wheel that shows the possible location of the dimension you're trying to play with. Rapid works for the dimension inside of the drawings. View on the dimension of the sheet that enables you to choose the two or either four options. You can move between the option, the tab key with the make the selection with the space bar. You can also click the manipulator select of the option. Figure 27.3 rapid dimension manipulator wheel is showing placing of the diameter linear dimension. Figure 27 throws placing a dimension with a rapid dimension manipulator wheel. It shows the left little square little thing right there, showing a diameter of 6, and then over here spacing of locked at 478. Tools do not have some limitation, however, it does seem to be capable of handling combined aligned dimension of the horizontal and vertical dimension. For example, if you dimension an angle, rapid dimension would allow you to dimension the line to the angle of the line. If the dimension between the diagonal corners of the rectangle, it wouldn't allow the placement of the diagonal dimension only the horizontal to vertical dimension. You can disable the rapid dimension manipulator with the control some of the other dimension. The system tool of the dimension property manager. This means lead to some of the confusion because it seems to they have 3 separate dimension property manager. There's only the one I am talking about with the perspective manager that appear with the dimension tool is active at the end of the drawing. The different property manager of the dimension tool is active within the part, and another one will select the existing dimension on the drawing. Reference dimension of the dimension expert. I've already made it for the case of the where I think would better for the reference of the on the drawing than making the model dimension for the option of the curse of the real life of the beginning of the simple parts of the actually of the can model them the way that you would detail them. The model items make more sense in this case. There may be retractable powers the user insists using model items on the drawing. Consensus through my own experience with the user that I've talked to the companies, users of the group, the forums indicate the functionality of the work in process, which is added over 10 years, although it may offer the interesting functionality may have save you and add time to dimension tolerance in parts of the drawing. It seems that it has particular difficulty molding cast parts, which typically it does not have parallel faces. Dimensional aspect may be really meant for the dimension 3D part of the non-driven dimension, but the scheme of meant to be either ASME Y1441 3D model based definition alleviate dependence of the detailed 2D drawing. The establish 3D model through the use of the 3D PDF step app 242 or the drawing standard of the dimension expert, but therefore not really appropriate for 2D drawings. Although SolidWorks does offer 2D dimension expert functionality, I have yet to meet any SolidWorks users aside from the SolidWorks employees who are very enthusiastic about current implementation of Dimension Expert. Annotation views. Annotation views are viewed for the model with the annotation have been added. You can access the annotation views. The annotation folder the model feature manager for the create with the automatically with the added dimension for the nodes to the part. You can use the annotation view for the model with the show the of the dimension in the which and the view in which of the created on the drawing and help parse the dimension into the views that are easy to read. Annotation views can be inserted manually or automatically. You can access the situation setting of the annotation view for the right menu mouse button annotation folders for the model shown in figure 27 and 24. The image of the part of the property manager you can get with inserting a name, the view of the drawing, and show the front of the top views of the model having an annotated associated with them, indicating the view by an A on the view symbol. So therefore, the A is in your annotations. You've done several notes towards the top and right and bottom annotation views. Driven dimension color. Driven the dimensions of the drawing displayed with engraved would be a problem because the drawing is printed when the drawing is printed. You give the two methods of dealing with this printing problem. The first method is to set the average property for the drawing forced to print to black and white rather than color or gray. Scale to find page property, choose file for the page setup of the page of the dialog box is shown in figure 27.5. 27.5, the page setup of the dialog box. Using system settings, view the document setting each for the drawing system sheet identifying standard sheet, scale, resolution, scale, fit, high quality, scale, draft, paper size, width, source, automatic, draw, automatic, color, black and white, orientation, landscape, and I show the basic page setup box. Second method is to set the color driving the dimension for the black and another is dark saturated color for the dark blue rather than gray. You can find the color setting by choosing the tools option color dimensions not imported or driven. Orientated baseline dimensions. Orientated baseline dimensions appropriate with the collection of linear dimensions when you have the number of items, all the dimension of the same reference. Flat patterns of the sheet metal parts of the often fall into the category applied with the orientated dimension. The zero location is selected first, followed by an each for the any for which you want a dimension. When the dimension becomes too largely tightly packed, SolidWorks automatically jog the witness of the lines to place out over the dimension adequately. You can create jog lines manually by using the right menu mouse button. After you create the set ordinary dimensions, you can add to the set by adding to ordinate from right menu mouse button. So that shows the baselines of the ordinate level. Baseline dimensions, non-linear dimensions that come in same reference of the stack together. They define space with the default setting of the baseline dimensions. Tools 2's option dimension offset distances. Baseline dimensions work best either with a horizontal or one of the dimension text is in line with the dimension of the default situation. ISO standard dimension for the vertical dimension of the text horizontal does not usually stack neatly because of the dimension text run with the over the dimension of the adjacent dimension figure 27 and 6. Ordinate baseline dimension in the same view. Exit the ordinate baseline dimension of the dimension relation of the toolbar. Right click a blank space for the more dimension and then selecting the type of the dimension they want to use. Alright, 27.6 shows the ordinate baseline dimensions in the same views. Auto dimensioning. If the insert model item feature is not likely to produce a dimension of the usable manufacturing drawing, the auto dimension feature is even less likely to do so. However, if you auto dimension with a controlled way with the right situation, it can be valid to create with the selected dimension auto dimension property just shown in figure 27.7. Auto dimension has dimension expert auto dimension into etnies of the dimension all etnies and views like the etnies horizontal scheme baseline dimension placement above or below, vertical scheme, baseline, dimension placement left to the right view, origin, and apply. Auto dimensions are available only with the drawing environment and play for the part of the environment with the functionality for the sketch of the part with a fully defined sketch tag tool. This access the auto dimension. Click with the smart dimension toolbar icon. Click with the auto dimension tab of the property manager. Auto dimension functionality can be fully dimensioned in the geometry and the drawing view. This is best to ordinate the basic line, or to ordinate the base line dimension where many of the dimensions derive from common reference, and often in the case of the sheet metal parts of the plate where many holes are drilled in to it. You should limit the use of the option. Do not allow the software to dictate the dimension scheme for your drawing. That was auto dimension. Reference sketch. For some of the type of the dimension, you need to create additional reference sketch. For example, the angle of dimension that may be desirable to add with instruction line points for the help of the defined angle. That you can add center lines, separate axis lines, individually, but you can add also sketching and center lines manually if needed. The type of the sketch is most often attached with the view rather than the drawing sheet. Tip: remember that if necessary, create an angle dimension by selecting 3 points vertex of the angle first instead of the 2 lines. You can do this by sketching on the typical drawing to indicate vertex of the angle. You can also create angle dimensions between angled line with a horizontal vertical direction. Do this with the smart dimension tool. Select with the angled line, then select one end point of the angled line for the angled vertex. A set of horizontal vertical arrows will appear. You can select an arrow from which you want to dimension the line. Understanding dimension options. Dimension property manager contains the setting of the default override of the tolerance style with some of the other important settings of the view of the dimension of the property manager for the driven dimension shown in figure 27 and 8. I will cover style of the tolerance specifically later in this chapter. The other tabs of the dimension property manager are discussed in this section. Dimension text panel enables you to add the text for the dimension. You can add lines for the text both above and below the dimension value with itself. You can add the text before or after the dimension value, same line. The dimension field is what place of the actual value in the syntax somewhat deleted. You can type it back in, and if the dimensions still work, and the dimension will still work. Dimension text panel includes the formatting tools, justification settings, and settings of the position of the dimension. The last 2 rows of the button include more commonly used symbols with access to complete libraries, such as any custom symbol that you have made for the library. 27 of the dimension property managers. Primary value override. Most infamous have it for former AutoCAD users of the overriding dimension value. Apparently, due to the popular demand, primary value override is not available in Solidworks and dimension property managers shown in figure 27 and 8. This option was added to the software mainly to enable to create dimension with words instead of numbers as shown in figure 27 and 9. Display option. Control the default setting with a parenthesis around the driven reference dimension and then add parentheses by default the dialog by selecting the tools option document property dimension add parentheses by default. Although you can also have the dual dimension default of the option dialog box shows the tools option. You can turn them on and off from the interface of the individual dimensions. When you're able to dual dimension option, Solidworks should be the setting from the tools option menu. The display option appear with the right mount menu button. These options shown in figure 27 and 8 are different depending on what type of the dimensions you've selected. In this image of the chapter for the diameter dimension was used. Foreshortened radius valid only with the individual radial dimension. From the foreshortened radius is shown in figure 27 of the 10. And the foreshortened radius dimension is typically used for a large radii of the dimension. Center point are not important. Foreshortened radius function, but it does not work with the diameter dimension. For the inspection dimension shown in figure 27 of the 10, not over or around the dimension. Cannot foreshorten a diameter directly. However, you can create the foreshortened radius chain with the diameter of the dimension over the diameter to hide the extension line. Dimension line in one direction. The option found is right-click both of the extension line with the dimension line with the right mouse button. It includes options to hide extension line with a hide dimension line. That's useful if you have the diameter dimension with the detail view where opposites have the diameter is outside of the detail view. This can also use the linear dimension. The determinate is known with the outside of the drawing view. So we foreshorten with the right menu mouse button on the drawing 1 displaying options, and we picked in foreshorten radius. Witness leader display with this panel enables you to set the area of the dimension line for the place inside of the witness line. These perform functionality more easily with the handle of the arrowhead from this panel. They can also change the display type of the individual arrowheads. Break line you select with the U of the document gap under the option of the width of the extension lines over the final the selected dimension broken other but a grab crossing dimension witness lines and arrows shown in figure 2711. Broken witness lines. Formatting of the dimension with the dimension palette, and it shows the dimensions in 4 array. When selecting a dimension for the drawing, the dimension could be modeled in an item on a reference dimension. The symbol formatting a dimension with a dimension palette. When this dimension on the drawing, the dimension can be modeled can model an item or reference dimension. A small symbol will appear above the right of the dimension. If you click on the symbol, the dimension palette will expand. The dimension palette enables you to do the following: add tolerance, specify dimension precision, assigning tiles favorites, applying parentheses, centering the dimension between witness lines, and applying intersection dimension, offset text with a leader. This helps horizontal vertical justification. Add text on the top, before, after, below the dimension line. That is your palette dimension palette formatting. Dimension palette appears on selected dimension and disappears when you move the cursor away from it. The dimension property manager still appears, but the dimension palette pops up right next to the dimension, making it very easy to use the figure 2712 show the dimension palette. Adding text to taller dimension, use the dimension palette. Dimension palette seems the most convenient place to make alteration of the basic dimension itself. Also, forget the format painter to copy the dimension formatting from multiple other dimensions. Alright, adding tolerances. You can add dimension tolerance to the dimension property manager dimension palette. With the discussed earlier, you can activate with the selected dimension that you want to modify the tolerance type that's available. Basically, bilateral, limited, symmetrical, minimum, maximum, fit with tolerance, fit tolerance only. No, you can add the tolerance dimension when the model tolerance is brought within the dimension if you insert the model's items feature. Right, refer to tolerance precision panel shown in figure 27.8. Appropriate fields for entering numbers are activated with the assigned corresponding tolerance type of the dimension. The tolerance types available with the Solidworks are shown in 2713. 2713 available the tolerance types of the Solidworks. Shows basic, bilateral, symmetrical, limited, maximum, minimum. In addition, the tolerance type of SolidWorks offer the range of the fit tolerance of the C8 through X7 is shown in figure 2714. And once again, this is the adding tolerances. Figure 2714 fit tolerance available for SolidWorks shows fit tolerance, document, style, save favorite. Tolerance option, dimension palette, user clearance, define transitional paths. Alright, changing precision values. SolidWorks precision means the number of the decimal place of the dimension or the display of the typical SolidWorks word for the 8 place of the remainder of the default units can create with the templates use the 8 place for the default settings that change with the number of places individual dimension as necessary of the first of the two blocks only with the precision or use the dimension precision. Second, use the tolerance precision. You can change the precision value of the individual dimension property manager for the dimension, as well as the entire document. Choosing tools option, document property units. Use geometric tolerance symbol. The full range of geometrical tolerance symbol is available to control frames, datum targets, and so on. Use the geometric tolerance dialog box to build control frames. This dialog box is shown in figure 2715. Commonly use the geometric tolerance symbols you may want to create use of these styles, and you can use different geometrical tolerances symbols. Their tolerance is 1, primary, secondary, teratite, and frames below frame, and then I'm not pretending to teach geometric talent, design, dimension, and tolerance in this chapter. I'm just presenting the tools SolidWorks provides, helping you make them happen. The SolidWorks tool was created in step with appropriate U.S. international drawing standards. If your company follows somewhat different practices, you feel you cannot meet the requirements within these tools, I can suggest a couple things. Before you do anything else drastic, you should put together an expertise on both sides of the issue. Sit down SolidWorks GT, geometric design tolerance expert, and an industry geometric tolerance design expert, along with your own company standards expert. They understand where the real difference lies. Get as close as requirements as possible for the tools available. Alter the requirements to match the compatibilities of the tool. Get another tool, meet your requirements. Counting. On Solidworks, change the software to meet the drafting requirements. Probably not going to production unless you can show if Solidworks has misinterpreted the American Society of Mechanical Engineers ISO standards. If you can, then they can make some time. They may take some time. Just be practical. Some flexibility may be required to keep your drawing production moving along without reinventing either your process, replacing the tools with using it in your own process. I've never been to a single company that really follows any standard 100%. There's always some local customization. Using dimension styles. Even the dimension styles apply many type of dimension styles were formerly known as favorites in SolidWorks. Unlike notes, dimension styles are not limited to fonts and formatting. Here's some of the most common use of the dimension styles. To add certain tolerance to the dimension, to set precision value to the dimension, to add text such as type, and to add dimension, to add common geometric dimension tolerance references. You can save styles from one document load with another document, even between the document types. For example, if you could load a part dimension style and then to a drawing, you can style update with the external file with the if any of the document is linked to also with the update with the next time it's open. Additionally, you can break the line to external styles with the appropriate button on the styles panel. Otherwise, the dimension dimension styles have a very similar function to the other type of styles. List of the functions. All the buttons on the styles panel are the same. Aligning and dimension annotations. When placed with dimension annotation of the drawing, if it's nice to have lined up in an orderly way, drawing contains lots of information. The information must be easy to read. Keeping the items lined up with a horizontal vertical alignment is one of the keys to making the information drawing easier accessible. SolidWorks have the toolbar, just alignment of the dimension annotation in the toolbar is shown with the labels with the individual icons, figure 27 to 16. 10 aligning toolbar to the command manager, right click on the command manager tab, select the custom command manager, then click on the new tab that appears, selecting the align toolbar from the list, and then it shows the big old line toolbar with the auto arrange dimension space, evenly linear align, line stagger, group ungroup, align collinear, align parallel, concentric, line left right, top bottom, horizontal vertical, space evenly across, space evenly down, space tightly, space tightly down. Alright, using the aligning tools. Aligning tools are all pre-select tools, some of the blocks. So it's best to box select, control select the dimension for the annotation for the alignment. The first one, then click with the toolbar icon. For example, to the line instead of the balloons to the right, you would drag the box around the balloons. Control select any of the balloons you want. You could not select with the box. Then click align right button. Although ideally with the balloons you use magnetic lines. These tools work best. Larger sections of dimension annotation for aligning individual dimensions of the pairs of dimension. It might be better to use the drag method and discuss the next one, the interference of alignment and grid snapping. Using align collinear, radial, and aligning parallel concentric alignment tool creates persistent relationships so the dimensions align with the tool will maintain the alignment. The other tool with the aligning toolbar don't work with this way. The other tools on the alignment don't work this way. Break an alignment created by these tools. You select break alignment with the right mouse button. Using the group tool allows you to set the dimension annotations with a single view to and maintain a spatial relations. They remain in the relative positions until they are ungrouped. Interference, alignment, and grid. When you drag individual dimension of the drawing, snap it to the grid. Annotation does not snap at the grid one over the way to the SolidWorks level to align it. If you can drag one dimensional level with another, either horizontal or vertical, the line appears the dimension of the interference of the position with the other dimension, just like as snapping in the model sketches. Annotations will interfere with the other annotations, they won't interfere with the dimension that they won't snap to the grid. If you want to disable both kinds with the snap of the grid interference with the fly with the hold down with the key with the drag with the dimension of the annotation, slide freely. Pretend disabling snapping with the tools option of the drawing. Disable the node with the dimension interference with the disable the snap with making sure the option is selected. You should be aware of this option controls both snap of the grid interference of the one dimension annotation with the another. You can separate the grid from interference. If you like the snap of the one to change the space, you can do so by selecting tools option, document property, dimension, offset, distance, changing the appropriate number of the distance of the dimension of the edge of the part with the distance between the dimension. If you want to group dimension annotations, you have the line with maintain their current alignment box of the selecting use the group function of the aligning toolbar. All of the selected dimension annotations must be along the same view. Using dimension palette alignment options. Dimension palette mentioned earlier, the chapter enables you to surround the dimension with all necessary information such as additional text, element, symbol, identification, leader control, dual dimension display, other useful information. Also can perform some of the alignment functions. If you multi-select dimension to activate the dimension palette, you will see what is shown in figure 27 to 17. And key of the dimension palette is used to apply to the line staggering function set of the vertical dimension to pack them closest to one another. The function is not found on the aligning toolbar. However, notice that it also has an aligning toolbar functionality, including bottom, top, left, right, justification. Functions have different names, symbol the dimension palette with a line toolbar, but they appear to do something same thing. Alright, the dimension palette is one of my favorite SolidWorks drawings because it is not consolidated loss of functionality into a small space available right when you need it. When it was originally released, many of you would have thought it got it in the way, but a small activation icon has solved the problem. The functionality has only improved. Arranging design and automatic dimensions automatically. Every few releases, SolidWorks improve the automatic dimension and arrange tools, but to me, they have a long way to go before I will trust the arrange dimension on a large drawing, but whether they offer the most benefit. Sometimes they do a good job of single rectangular parts, but they do not save much time on the complex parts. But model item on the drawing in SolidWorks automatically arrange the dimension for the dimension operation left of the dimension palette, but it is also called auto arrangement dimension. Also, when you use the automatic dimension of the function mentioned earlier in this chapter, SolidWorks automatically arranges the dimension for you. Best way to use the tool, the dimension general annotation is small of the control situation until you learn how to. They react to the type of the work you tend to frequently selecting items of the group that are close to where they need to go. Well, help automatic tools to do a better job. Alright, tutorial working with a dimension and tolerance. If the tolerance for the single part of the trouble a different way with the dimensions, demonstrate with a different dimension for the tolerance function. Follow these steps to learn more about the topics. Open the part with the download material chapter 7, the tutorial solid part. Open the drawing, the download material chapter 27, the drawing, solid drawing. Title the windows, choosing the window, the title, vertically drag part of the top level, the feature manager within the drawing window. This will automatically populate 4 drawing views. Delete the top view, leaving the views and showing figure 27 and 18. Drawing after 4 steps. Choose insert for the model item to ensure that select all options selected with the annotation mark for the drawing option select with the dimension. Also move the chair for the second source destination with the drop down list of the entire model. Click with the green check mark icon once the drawing populate. Result in drawing is quite cluttered. Delete the move dimensions so the drawings look in figure 27 to 19. Shaft of the drag. Insert for the finished symbol with the right view. Do the same with this 1.9 inch dimension. You may have the first shift drag into the other with the drag into it again with the correctly attached position. Control set with the horizontal ordinate dimensions left end of the part with the dimension of the X of the in each of the column of the holes. Do so with a row of holes using the bottom of the edge of the front view 0 to reference. Remember that you want to create the ordinated dimension starting with the normal smart dimension. Right click display with the Morse dimension list, then selecting your choice. If necessary, the edit center mark center lines to view the clarity. Select the 1.88 diameter dimension text over the type after the dimension text. Add bilateral tolerance 300 negative 5 thousandths to the tile by clicking the adding style icon. Apply the newly created dimension style with a radius of 1 dimension. The result up to this step is shown in figure 27 to 20. Make one of the dimension leave the edge either 1.88 or the radius 100 dimension curve with extension line with a 4 and 500 dimension. Select the 4 and 500 dimension in the property manager. Select the use of the document gap option, break lines and panels on the leaders tab. Place the B data marker with the circumference of a smaller arc on the left end of the part. Create geometrical tolerance control frame shown figure 27 to 21. In the right view, show the thickness of selecting the 100 dimension and adherence of the note below the text showing using the dimension that's shown in figure 27 and 22. So we have the last two dimension horizontal ordinate group 3,837 thousandths, 4,000, 76. Start with the new detail view with included the holes dimension called out is shown in figure 27 to 23. Play for the detail view above the main view. Right click the 0 for the horizontal ordinate, select add to ordinate, play for the 2 ordinate dimension in the detail view. Use geometrical tolerance to make the flatness called 200,000 of an inch. Add a leader to the control view with the property manager. Attach the leader of 100 thousandths of an inch. Thickness dimension right view. Bottom line. Alright, the bottom line argument how to decide with the dimension of the drawing is a valid process for creating geometrical plans. From the objects are built, with the often difficult to separate the best factors for the opinion, although I leave it up to you to decide the issue with yourself. The chapter intended to help you understand how to create the type of the drawing you want. The biggest conflict in subject arises whether to play with live model dimensions on the drawing or to allow requirements of the drawing to specify the dimensions or place, where I am by no means impartial when it comes to this question, but again, you must choose for yourself. Master create a drawing of a part called simple part, solid part with a denoted material with a chapter in front view shown here. Dimension expert on the dimension of the view. Master use the dimension palette with the add extension with the sum of the dimension, add plus or minus 5,000 of an inch to the 5.236 dimension. Select one of the whole callouts for play with the depth of the board. Through you the dimension property manager to do this. Box selection 3143 to 1803 and 5236. Dimension make these inspection details dimensions. Master it in the side view for vertical order dimension. The dimension some of the prominent features from that view. Chapter 28 using layers, line fonts, and colors.